Hello, Frank. Hello, Bill. Hello, other person who I can't see. You early people, you get a treat. It's not really a treat. Oh, never mind. Where? Oh, where? I'm right here. Oh, see, you're falling behind, and now there's somebody else there, so now nobody gets a treat. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just I suddenly freaked out, so that's not going to happen. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. I got nothing. Like always, I should have something else. Well, I was going to sing a song. I was going to sing a song that I wrote. It's a stupid song. I don't think I'm there yet, though. I don't think I can quite do that because the thing that I forget is this lives on YouTube. So if I just think, well, I'm just doing this before we start, it'll still be there. And that's just ghastly. It's not a serious song, by the way. It's about the fact that it's Wednesday. So there you go. I'm going to give it about 1 more minute and then we'll get started. If anybody has anything they would like to say, please feel free to put it right there in the chat. I'll check it later when we're done. Or, of course, you can leave comments on this, but I'll be saying all that again in a minute. Right, 30 seconds. Or something. Or I could go ahead and start. Yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and start because otherwise I'm just sitting here watching the clock count down, and that's terrible. Thanks, everybody. Let's begin. The House report is in the House, and figuring out yesterday's biggest story someday. It is Wednesday, the 7th of October. Time once again for macOS Ken Live. Hey, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me here. I'm Ken Ray, welcoming you to macOS Ken Live. If you don't know what macOS Ken is, by the way, if you're finding this without having found that, macOS Ken is a daily Apple news and news related to Apple News show that I've been doing for close to 15 years. It'll be 15 years this January. And tried a few different things along the way. Did a show that was actually on the radio for a hot minute called Technocracy Radio. Did macOS Ken Live before as a call-in show. Done a bunch of other stuff. So if you don't know why you're watching this, macOSken.com will actually link you to a lot of the stuff that goes on outside of what we're doing right here. Speaking of what we're doing right here, second part of the show, I think I said yesterday or today, excuse me, on macOS Ken, only time will tell what the biggest story of the day was. You would think it would be easy to figure out what the biggest story yesterday was. I'm going to make the case for why we actually don't know yet and how something else could be. Before we get to that, though, as I said at the top of the thing, the House report is in the House. Part of it. I know we talked about this a bit yesterday, but there's been some more stuff sort of delineated that I kind of wanted to go over a bit. Stuff that I couldn't really comment on macOS Ken because macOS Ken isn't the kind of show where you do that. Although we can talk later about editorial in like a news show and stuff like that. If you wanna, of course, you won't be able to tell me. So if I feel like it, let's talk about what came out of the House report, though. Now, really quickly, if you strip out all of the footnotes, according to Philip Elmer DeWitt, you're still looking at 45 pages. I have not had a chance to do that. I don't mean strip out the footnotes. I mean, I haven't had a chance to read it. Though I can tell you, knowing what my yesterday was like and my today, I wouldn't have had time to read 45 pages yet. Plan to do that over the next couple of days just so I can be more well-versed. Again, though, that is just the Apple part. Of the 450 pages, 45 pages, if you took out the footnotes and all that stuff, is 45. I would like to tell you that I'm going to read the whole report at some point. I fully intend to read the Apple part of the report at some point. I'd like to be the kind of guy who would sit and pore over the whole thing. I know I'm not that guy. So we'll be working from what other people have said and some excerpts that others have pulled out. The CNBC report that I ran with yesterday on macOS Ken talked about the 450-page report written after 16 months of investigation that included hearings, interviews, and the review of 1.3 million documents from each of the companies involved, those, of course, being Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. Some of the things that they suggest: imposing structural separations and prohibiting, really quickly, I'm sorry, I jumped a little bit ahead. Most of the headlines yesterday said that what the Democrats in the House are suggesting is that big tech be broken up. Now, what's funny is CNBC makes a point in its article of saying they didn't call for outright breaking them up, and yet CNBC does refer to calls to break them up in its own article that it wrote. So there's going to be some other stuff that we learn. There's going to be some, fingers crossed, there's going to be some nuance, but we'll talk about that word in a minute too. So some of the stuff that the Democrats have proposed, and I say the Democrats because it was only the Democrats that wrote this report that came out. It was a bipartisan commission. Some of the Republicans say they like some of the ideas. Some of the Republicans say they like the spirit, but they hate the wide sweeping ideas or the sweeping changes that the Democrats are suggesting. And then some of them are Jim Jordan, who is a single issue individual, and that is everybody hates conservatives. That is his single issue, that tech is out to get conservatives. And again, we could talk sometime, probably not today, about how that is disprovably true. Provably untrue. One of those things. I disagree with him. And we can talk about why some other time. So one of the things the Democrats suggest: imposing structural separations and prohibiting dominant platforms from entering adjacent lines of business. This means that the Democratic staff recommends solutions including forcing tech companies to be broken up or imposing business structures that make different lines of business functionally separate from the parent company. They say that Google may have to get rid of YouTube if that were, drawn out to its fullest. They also say that Facebook might have to get rid of Instagram. I'm assuming that that does mean that Apple might have to get rid of what? Everything that is not making hardware at that point? Because Apple doesn't sell Pages, Numbers, and Keynote. So, okay, they could probably keep doing that because they don't make money off of it. But would they have to get rid of Apple Music, run it as its own business? Would they have to get rid of Apple TV Plus, run it as its own business? What about News Plus, which I think makes 85 cents for Apple? It strikes me as kind of odd. Because as things move on, right? I mean, companies have shifted what they do. Microsoft used to make operating systems for Windows machines. Microsoft now makes hardware. Microsoft makes cloud services. Would Microsoft, instead of evolving its business, have to fund a completely new business that is separate from Microsoft? Or are you allowed to run your business as an incubator that eventually has to spin off something if that suddenly starts to make money? I don't quite understand that proposal. This one I really hated, though. They're instructing antitrust agencies to presume mergers by dominant platforms to be anti-competitive. Can I say that again? They would want to instruct antitrust agencies to presume that mergers by dominant platforms are anti-competitive, shifting the burden onto the emerging partners to prove that their deal would not harm competition rather than making enforcers prove that it would. I don't understand. Exactly. I mean, I guess I get the idea. If there's some young up-and-comer who maybe is eventually going to challenge your business or someone else's, you decide you want to buy them. Okay, I can see where that would be seen as anti-competitive. I don't think, though, if what they're saying is we have to assume that every time Apple buys something, that it is bad for competition. And so Apple and the company being bought have to prove that it's not bad for competition. Isn't buying something to better compete the reason that you do it? I wonder where the line is there, where the gray line, where the nuance, again with that word, and we will come back to that word again here in just a bit. They say that they want to prevent dominant platforms from preferencing their own services, instead making them offer equal terms for equal products and services. I don't know if that just means like placement in the App Store, or if that means if Apple is charging $9.99 for Apple Music, they have to make sure that Spotify can also just charge $9.99 for Apple Music, or for Spotify, excuse me. I don't think Spotify gets to charge anything for Apple Music. I don't know if that would mean that they can't charge the 30% commission that they currently charge, if that just means They can't place Apple Music over Spotify or instead of Spotify. Lots of stuff that we don't know yet. They would also require dominant firms to make their services compatible with competitors and allow users to transfer their data. I'm all for that. I'm 100% for that. I don't know how that can be Apple's responsibility. So many apps at this point store their data in the cloud or have a way that you can sign in from a different place. I would actually say making sure that your data can be transferred from one ecosystem to another might actually be on the app developer at this point, but I think most app developers are kind of doing that, right? The fact that I have to sign in with Facebook or Apple or Google indicates to me, I mean, yes, that is a fail-safe if somebody gets a hold of my phone, but I would assume that that means that if I, suddenly switch ecosystems, if I go from Apple to Android, that I would be able to still sign in with Facebook, sign in with Apple, sign in with Google, and all my information would be there as well. Now, if you're talking about things like my contacts and stuff like that, yeah, I'm 100% on board with this. I'm absolutely on board with this, mostly because I remember the hours that I spent transferring my information from my Sidekick to my iPhone because there was no really good way to transfer stuff at the time. There's also all the information I lost on my handspring visor because I made one mistake one time and hit the wrong thing and lost years of contacts. Tragic, I know. Now, in the part that's specific to Apple, it kind of made me wonder if the Democrats have a time machine or if they have a way of exploring alternate timelines. According to the House report, in the absence of competition, this is because Apple is a monopoly as far as distribution on iOS is concerned, as far as the House is concerned. And so their conclusion is, in the absence of competition, Apple's monopoly power over software distribution to iOS devices has resulted in harms to competitors and competition, reducing quality and innovation among app developers and increasing prices and reducing choices for consumers. I would like to visit the timeline where they can prove that that's true. 2 million apps in the App Store, 2 million apps in the App Store. And I'm not saying that what they're saying isn't true. I'm saying it seems to me that they're assuming quite a bit there. They're saying because Apple is the only way you can put stuff on iOS, there has been a lack of innovation. Apple itself seemed to sort of address this, saying the App Store has enabled in its response, which was lightning fast, but like I said on macOS Ken, we knew this was coming, so they should have been ready. Apple in its response says the App Store has enabled new markets, new services, and new products that were unimaginable a dozen years ago, and developers have been primary beneficiaries of this ecosystem. I think I may have told this story before. I know I haven't on this show, but I was running an interview for the Veronicas. Laura Burstein was still doing Moblog Nation at the time. I think that would know what was the show called. I can't remember what the podcast was called, but it was put out by Moblog Nation. And one of the Veronicas was on, and we were talking about phones, or they were talking about phones. I was just running the board because this was 2005, and one of the Veronicas said that what she would love to see is something like Photoshop on a phone sometime, so that she could retouch blemishes. But I don't think we'll ever see that, she said. I got a free app on my iPhone for retouching blemishes because I'm vain, but also because we can do that now. Certainly, these are things that were unthought of before the App Store. Well, not unthought of because that woman from the Veronicas thought of it, but things that were not possible at that point. I keep saying it seems to me that the House investigation lacks nuance. And I'll say that for a couple of reasons. Again, without having read the report, the excerpts that I have read seem to paint with a broad brush, and that's not going to lead to nuance. The other thing, though, is they took 16 months to investigate 4 of the largest tech companies. And what do you know? After those 16 months, decided that all 4 of those companies were anti-competitive. It's almost like they decided before they went in. I'm not sure how you, as one committee, run one investigation into Apple, which is wildly different from Facebook, which is wildly different from, somewhat different from Google, all of which are wildly different from Amazon, all at the same time. How long did it take in the late 90s to investigate Microsoft? And that was Microsoft. Just by itself, that was Microsoft. And yes, they then had their actual trial, which was over 20 years ago now, as I say, so I've forgotten a lot of it. I feel like it might have taken more than 16 months to come to that, though. And yet we're gonna say in 16 months, these 4 companies amazingly are doing exactly what we thought they were doing when we first started. Huh, what do you know? Ben Thompson at Stratechery wrote a piece along a similar line. I can't remember honestly if I thought this or if I picked it up from him. I don't know. Apple 3.0 ran an excerpt of it, though. What Thompson said is the subcommittee report is simply a new expression of an old idea. The details matter less than the fact that it exists. So much modern antitrust action against tech companies is like pushing on a string, he says. The reason these companies have power is because so many customers choose to use them, and it is both difficult and probably unwise to try to regulate the individual choices of billions of users. At the same time, he says, I am sympathetic to the issue of just how much power these companies have. Constraining that power, though, needs new laws that start with internet assumptions, and anti-monopoly advocates would do well to focus on solutions that, instead of restricting privileges, extend them. We all know monopolies are bad. I don't actually know if we all know monopolies are bad. It seems to me that it ought to be on a case-by-case basis, and I'm not making a case just because of Apple. I will admit I am not completely well-versed in this. I think Amazon, whatever, I won't get into that. It needs a bit more time, it needs a bit more focus, and I'm not 100% certain that when all of this is over, what the House has suggested is going to happen. Because you do have Republicans in Congress fighting the Democrats on the same committee. You have Republicans and Democrats on the same committee fighting each other about what they think needs to happen. Some think it hasn't gone far enough. Others think they're focusing on the wrong thing entirely. We'll see. So how is that definitely not the biggest story yesterday? We'll talk about that in just a moment. First, I want to remind you, though, about the other stuff that I do, because that's a thing that I do. As I mentioned at the top of the show, macOS Can Live is a daily Apple News show. It's about news, to either Apple News or news related to Apple News, or occasionally just something that I find amusing. Always technology involved. Comes out Monday through Friday. Ideally, it happens by between 5:30 and 6:30 on the East Coast. That has not been happening as much lately as I would like. I'm a night owl. I was gonna say I'm a horrible night owl, but I'm actually excellent at being a night owl. Anyway, it's usually out in the morning. Well, it's always out in the morning. It's hopefully out before you wake up if you live in the US. If you live other places, I can't help your sleep hours. I'm sorry. I wish I could. I also do a show for Secure Mac. It is called The Checklist. It is a weekly review of technology, safety issues, concerns, security stuff. Sometimes it's just good news about a platform. Sometimes it's bad news about a platform. Almost always there's a how-to element to it, because I don't just want to, like, throw out news and say, well, good luck. If we come with a problem, hopefully we come with a solution. So there's that. And then finally, there's a discussion show that I do called In a Few Minutes, talking about a lot of the same kinds of stuff that we talk about here, but with a guest. And then we also tend to veer away from tech a couple of days a week. There's a fun game that we play called Wheel of Stuff. If you check all that stuff out, that'd be fantastic. And again, there's links to all of that stuff. I think there's links to all of that stuff at macoscan.com. And if you would check that out, that would be wonderful. And thanks. So how can we not know that what came out of Congress yesterday was the absolute biggest story? How could we not know that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, it may come to nothing. it may be Sound and Fury. The other reason, though, is because we don't know what Apple is going to talk about next Tuesday. I don't expect anything earth-shattering next Tuesday at the high speed event. I mean, they're obviously going to introduce 5G iPhones, but that's just a faster iPhone, right? We don't know. See, that's the thing. We don't know yet. Laura Martin at Needham and Company actually laid out a bunch of reasons that the House report is not, I don't want to say not worth the paper it's printed on, but she sees a lot of concerns about what they've said there. The key regulatory question is whether Apple, and yes, we're getting back to the thing next Tuesday. The key regulatory question is whether Apple uses the App Store to systematically foreclose competition or engage in unfair or deceptive practices using quality control as an excuse. This question cannot be answered by claims of a few developers whose particular apps may have been technically deficient, failed to meet some security standard, or whose apps were unfortunately harmed by legitimate changes in the App Store. Another problem she has, determining whether Apple behaved anti-competitively when it preloads its own 40 apps will involve considerations such as the difficulty of downloading and installing replacements for Apple's preloaded apps, i.e. none, the level of integration of Apple's owned apps with its operating system, and any negative effects on innovation inside Apple's ecosystem. There was a third point that she had as well, but it doesn't matter. My point is, she seems to think that a lot of what they presented in their report won't hold up, that it won't pass muster, that it will come to nothing. At the same time, we don't know what Apple is going to introduce next week. There was an Apple event that changed the world. There were a couple, actually. I mean, you could argue that when Steve Jobs introduced the Mac in 1984, that changed the world. Everybody didn't have a Mac immediately. Maybe it did push Windows, certainly, to see what was possible and make their software more user-friendly, make their operating system more user-friendly. You could argue that the Mac changed the world, that the Mac event changed the world. The one that really changed the world was in January of 2007. That was the one where Apple introduced the iPhone. And that changed the world, because even if everybody didn't buy an iPhone, suddenly you saw what a smartphone could be. And now, go out and try to find a smartphone that doesn't look like an iPhone. To some degree, anyway. Can you even get a QWERTY keyboard anymore? I'm not 100% certain you can. The Apple event in 2007 changed the world. I don't think that's likely to happen next week. But I go back to things like the AT&T CEO, the AT&T Communications CEO, saying that he's not sure why the customer would want to use 5G and that he doesn't think that people are going to want to pay for it. Maybe Apple is going to introduce something in their phone that is going to show us why we do want that. That's asking for a lot from next week's event, but here's the thing. I would argue that the introduction of the iPhone trumps yesterday's report from the House. I would argue that the introduction of the iPad trumps yesterday's report from the House. I might argue that the introduction of Apple Watch trumps yesterday's report from the House. It depends. It is possible that Congress and the next administration or the current administration, if it rolls into the next one, are going to get their ducks in a row, that they're actually going to enact legislation, that they're actually going to do structural changes that are going to completely remake the landscape of Silicon Valley. If that actually happens, then yes, what came out of the House yesterday is absolutely the biggest thing that happened. No question. I would say that actually trumps Apple Watch and may trump iPad. Doesn't beat the iPhone. We don't know what's coming out next week. We don't know what Apple is going to show us we're going to be able to do with our phones. We don't know what the biggest story was yesterday. Check back in 5 years, 10 years, or 13 years by the timelines I just laid out. I think that about does it for this afternoon, or for this presentation, whatever. Afternoon, evening, morning, maybe, where you are. I don't know where you are. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them on this video, or of course you can email me, info@macosken.com. If you're here live, please stick around, because I know there's been chat going on and I'll try to address some of it. If you're not here live, We're doing this every Monday through Friday now. It's 3 p.m. Pacific, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. That would be 5 Central, 30 Central, 5:30 Central, and 4:30 in the mountains, I suppose. There, I've done a lot of that. In Hawaii, I think it's like 12:30 in the afternoon. You still got the rest of the day ahead of you. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. Talk to you soon. Excuse me while I take a sip of my tasty beverage, and then we'll do the post-show. Yay! Who's here? Frank's here. Chuck Joyner's here. Chuck Joyner, man, I was gonna. Oh, what are you doing later? Let's talk. Can we talk later, please? I'll be your friend. Cool. Bill got the reminder sorted, so he's here. Excellent. How can you define a monopoly until you define the market? A little tough when the market changes or didn't exist before. That's really interesting. That's what Bill says about what the House was saying yesterday. Wheel of Stuff live. Who's going to play, Bill? You? See, the problem is there's a real lag here. I know that. But yeah, Wheel of Stuff would actually be a fun thing to play live. See, I could play, but that's kind of terrible, isn't it? I think that's terrible anyway. No, I guess that's all the comments. Everybody else was just doing like a little one-hit things, like Chuck saying that he found it, which I'm very glad about. Chuck has also agreed to talk to me later. Cool. I'll text you, Chuck. Or you can text me. Or we can text each other. Right, I guess that's it. Oh, Webb Bixby back in the house. Hello, Webb. Good to see you again. Thanks for being here. And everybody else who's not chatting, thank you for being here too. Yeah, right. I'm out. Got to bounce. Got 3 shows to produce by tomorrow. Yay. Take care, everybody. Thank you. I'm sorry. If that sounded glib at all, seriously, thank you for doing this every day. When I look up there and I see that there's not just me, it means the world. So thanks.